why don't we go ahead and get started? I'd like to just go around the screen and ask people to introduce themselves and maybe say what one thing that you like to, if you need a break from work or whatever you do and need some green, what do you like to do to get some green in your life? And I'll start, and I'm Bill Cousins, and I'm currently serving as the convener of our Philadelphia chapter, and I'm on the board of IPL as well for Pennsylvania. And I live in the Mount Airy section, and I like to go, if I only have a couple of hours, I like to go for a walk in somewhere in the Wissahickon Creek watershed. And I'll pass it to Barbara, if you want to. You're muted, Barb. You're muted. Still muted.
Okay.
There you
go. Sorry about that. My name's Barbara He, and I live in Fox Chase. So when I need some green, if it's not nice enough weather that I'm out in my garden, I go to Pennypack Park, and I usually go in off of Marie Road and walk through. That's my little section of the park.
Right, and you could pass it to someone else now.
Oh, right. Okay, I will pass it to Judy.
Thanks. I'm Judy Morgan. I'm with the Community Net Zero project within Philly Neighborhood Networks. And I guess what comes to mind is right now we're blessed with this wonderful backyard with the stand of trees behind it. And I just love sitting in the back near the trees and just looking up. It's wonderful.
Judy, you could pass it to someone else.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Jerry.
Hi, I'm Jerry Tootin. My name is Jerry Tootin, and I would like to make you aware that on the Environmental Justice Committee of Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church, we are having trying to bring the congregation into planting native species, because it seems like people are not doing that in this area. And if we can just get a little corridor of everybody planting even just a little row of natives, we can help the birds and the bugs to survive. And it's crucial. When I have a minute, I paint, but I also like to dig in the dirt. And John's here too. John, why don't you?
I'm John Tootin.
What do you like to do?
And since I've given up trying to deal with our system of judicial, and I find that being in the country, surrounded by lots of trees, is really what's, keeping me going. So thank you.
Pass it to someone. Pass it to.
I'll pass it to, I can't read that.
Timothy.
go. Hi, I'm Tim Beckham. I live in Erdheim. My wife and I have been here for about 5 years, and we're in a group with Judy, CNEP, Community Net Zero Education Project. In terms of being green, I think there's two parts to that. There's the direct action, like planting trees or doing whatever you can to control climate change. But there's also something that keeps you going, and that is having fun. So my wife and I like to dance. So when I dance, I feel really green, and I am more likely to do work on climate change. And it's been, because of the COVID thing, it's been 2.5 years since we've been able to go out and dance. So now that it's getting better, we're going to go dance again. And I feel kind of down because we haven't danced, but we will. And then I'll feel better. Anyway, oh, Peter Winslow is smiling right now, so I'm going to get him to say hi.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, I am smiling. My name is Peter Winslow. I'm a resident of West Mount Airy and a former, or let's say a board member emeritus of PAIPL. I'm fortunate enough to live across the street from Carpenter Woods, which is small, but is actually certified as an old growth forest for the East and was the second bird sanctuary in the United States. And I'm close enough to take Johnson, the Wissahickon, but my go-to place is the Morris Arboretum. And it's not too late to get out there and smell the witch hazel, which is absolutely delicious at this time of year. So that's a good place for you to frolic, Tim. And I will pass to my good friend, Pat Libby.
Hey there, Peter. I'm Pat Libby. I live in Roxborough, and I'm only a block from the football field for the local high school that's right below Gorgas Park, which is small, but it's actually amazing in diversity. There's wonderful hills to go sledding on. There's a rocky section. There's a wonderful children's playground with rubber stuff on the playground. Areas for picnicking. It's fantastic. So I love to go hiking on the football field every morning. And when I can, I get over and walk through the park, and I pick up trash both places. Oh, I wanted to tell the woman about the natural plants. I don't know if she's ever talked to Karen Melton, but her grounds are totally natural stuff. She might want to talk to her, check in with her. I don't know who's all spoken because I came on late. I was talking to Frack Tracker.
I think Bert Dallas has not had a chance to say hi.
Monty hadn't had a chance either.
Go ahead, Bert.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Bert Dallas. I am a member of Radnor Meeting, which is a suburb of Philadelphia. However, I live in Roxborough, and where I like to go to get to whatever nature I can find is along Forbidden Drive and the Wissahickon Creek. It's going up and down of it is just very reviving for me. And
that's beautiful.
Yes, and when I can, when the weather is right, I like to commute via bicycle along Kelly Drive and just kind of take in everything with the rivers going by and the rowers in the early morning. And it is wonderful. And I pass it to Amani.
Thank you, Bert. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amani Reed, the Policy Engagement Manager for Pennsylvania NFA Power & Light, and I'm based in Philadelphia from New Jersey. I live not too far from Temple University where I graduated, and there's an environmental center in Strawberry Mansion not too far from me called the Discovery Center. There's a reservoir there. It was called East Park Reservoir. It's now Strawberry Mansion Reservoir, and there's also a nature trail, and there's a lot of birds that pass by. So it's a really nice spot I like to go to. Has anyone not went? I apologize. I think
Andres hasn't.
Oh yeah. Okay. Pass it over to Andres.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Andres Celin. I always say Andres is also fine. And I am the Outreach Director for Councilmember Helen Gym. So really excited to be here with you all tonight and very grateful for the opportunity to come share. By far, the Wissahickon Creek is my favorite part of the city. So I think that's my sort of top green space. I live in Norris Square on the southern part of Kensington. So when I have a little bit of time, I'll go to Penn Treaty Park, which has sort of like a pretty nice green open space, but is also next to the water. That's a big one for me. And much like Tim, well, I grew up in Colombia in South America in a city called Cali, which is the third biggest city and also the salsa capital of the world. So for me, dancing is also a big joy / green activity. And also have not been able to do that at a proper establishment for a couple of years. So hopefully we'll be able to do that soon.
Well, one night of dancing will take 20 years off your life.
Okay, before Andres is going to be our presenter tonight, talking about the.
I think Mark Smith didn't talk yet, did he? Did you?
Well, I already talked a lot when I got on. So I'll just say Pennypack Ecological Trust, Huntington Valley, and Bryn Athyn. I used to live next to it. It reminds me of where I grew up. It has both woods and meadows, and it's getting into be a beautiful time. The bluebirds are going to come back and nest, and it's a really amazing place.
That's great. Thank you very much, everybody. I think we have like 2 brief announcements before Andres can get into his presentation. Amani, you had one, I think it said Ipl announcement.
Yeah. Did you want me to?
Yeah,
hold up
go
on that?
ahead. Yeah,
Awesome.
sure.
Thank you. Yeah. Not to take up too much time, but I just want to let everyone know that Pennsylvania Interfaith Fire and Light is currently trying to take several different actions this year. Specifically, we're working with Climate Action Campaign, and we're looking to not only do in-person events like town halls, lobbying meetings, once again, but this time hopefully in person. We're taking actions as far as phone banking and as well as petition signing. And I wanted to share a few of those with you guys very quickly, and I'm going to drop them in the chat as well. If anyone's interested, I just asked if you could email me, which my email is in the chat as well. The first one, as far as the petition, is directly to President Biden, Congress, and his cabinet, and it's urging climate change and transition to clean energy, which we are strongly trying to encourage him to do. As we know, climate cannot wait. So there's a petition that is going out with the Climate Action Campaign, and we're looking for petition signers. If anyone's interested, once again, the link is in the chat. And then as well, as far as phone banking, we're working with Climate Action Campaign as well. Phone banking using a line that goes to President Biden and his administration to once again make those strides with climate change. And we're just trying to continue the conversation and go broader. We're working locally in Philadelphia as well as other parts of the state, and we're having more conversations around people to contact in the state for actions. But this is an action we're taking as far as federally and reaching out to President Biden. So we hope you guys can participate if you have the time to sign the petition. It just takes a few seconds. But once again, if you guys do, we'd love to know that you did. Yeah, thank you so much. And if you have any questions, my email's in the chat. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Amani. And then Judy had an announcement of the work that their group is doing. Judy?
Yeah, our group, which is the Community Net Zero Education Project within Philly Neighborhood Networks. Probably some of you know Philly Neighborhood Networks. Anyway, we are doing local outreach, trying to, we'll be doing tabling in the spring. We have a slideshow presentation. We've been contacting organizations, religious organizations, civic organizations to work collaboratively and try to assist whatever they're doing in climate outreach and education, and bring whatever resources we can bring. We're just 6 people. Tim and I are both part of the planning team, but we're looking for anybody else who would like to do tabling in the spring. It'll be beautiful, it'll be fun, and and COVID permitting, and through the summer as well, probably. So if you're interested, I'll put my contact information in the chat room, and feel free to contact me. We're basically trying to take in these kind of difficult times, take a very positive approach of like, everybody can make a difference, and that a strong commitment at the neighborhood level will really make a difference in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and also making communities more resilient in the face of weather extremes in the future, where community resilience will be important. So yes, if you'd like to help with tabling or developing materials, we're hoping to do a lot of fact sheets on different topics like heat pumps and electric vehicles and so forth. Just please give me a call. Love to talk with you. Thank you.
Yeah, Judy's group, she's shared with me a 1-page handout that they have that has on one side very practical, easy steps that an individual or a household can take to reduce their climate footprint. And on the back, things that are a little more aggressive, a little more time consuming, but are, bigger steps that can have a bigger impact. So Judy, if you get her contact information and reach out to her. I'm sure she can share that information with you.
Yeah, or if your religious organization would like to use some of our materials or have a slideshow presentation, we would be very happy to provide that.
Great. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Okay, we are, I think, up for the main event now. Andres is, as he said, he's the outreach staff person for Helen Gym, one of our at-large city council people, and has been involved in the development of the Community Health Act, which Helen has introduced to City Council. And when I saw it, I thought this is something that really could have a big impact for economic and environmental justice in the city. And so we asked Andres to join us and describe a little bit the Community Health Act and the benefits he sees that can be coming if City Council can be prevailed upon to implement it. So Andres, I'll turn it over to you, and we'll have time for discussions and questions. I think Andres has some slides to present, some information to share first. Andres, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just going to ask if folks can give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides.
Yes.
Excellent. Cool. So again, I'm Andres Celin. I am the Outreach Director for Councilmember Gym. Thank you so much for having us and to inviting us for to have this discussion. I'm going to be sharing some details about the legislation. We'll have plenty of time to answer any questions or thoughts or feedback that you have. And also we'll close out by offering some additional opportunities to sort of stay engaged and hopefully help support the passing of the bill as well. So the Community Health Act is, and I'll go in some level of detail a little bit further on, but essentially it's designed to protect communities who have been historically overburdened by pollution and other toxic emissions. And it does this by developing the city's first ever comprehensive environmental justice community map, which I'll explain how that works a little bit in a moment, and also then uses that map to determine within those communities who have been historically overburdened, what under particular kinds of permits and potentially different licenses for industrial use, what kind of permits sort of can and cannot be granted depending on what the proposed industrial use is and the sort of level of pollution in context. The legislation was co-sponsored by Councilmember Gautier and Councilmember Brooks. We've had the very active support of the different organizations you see on the screen. We've had the pleasure of working with Amani, as well as Peter through Power, who Amani was at the press conference to launch the legislation. We've had a number of meetings with folks at Power who've asked very valuable, incisive questions and provided us a very helpful degree of feedback in terms of drafting the bill. Up until introduction, we've also had upwards of 50 organizations and at this point over 500 individuals sign on as community co-sponsors for the legislation as well. So this was a priority for Councilmember Gym from a number of angles. We know that Philadelphia is one of the cities in the country that sort of burdens its residents with the most amount of pollution. And we know that historically, for a number of different reasons, it's been working class, Black and brown, communities of color who have borne the brunt of the impact of a lot of the industrial use pollution that we've seen over the years in Philadelphia. We also know that this is in large part due to policies that have deepened the impacts of structural racism, such as redlining and other policies that have made it so that in Philadelphia specifically, many of those communities that have been overburdened by industrial use have been sort of marginalized economically in terms of housing and a number of other different factors. We know that across Pennsylvania, people of color make up roughly 22% of the population, but 40% of communities that are made up predominantly communities of color live within 3 miles of a major power or coal plant. Right? We also know that in Philadelphia specifically, most incidents of asthma attacks in a year happen to Black children. So for Councilmember Gim, this is as much a racial justice issue as it is an environmental justice issue. So there's 4 primary components of this legislation that would make this, if passed, the first ever environmental justice legislation at the municipal level of its kind. So firstly, the bill requires the Department of Health to identify and map environmental justice communities. It then looks at historic impacts of an overburdening of communities due to pollution and other toxic emissions in context, in conjunction with other social demographic factors. It gives the city the authority to grant, to deny, or to require different remediation steps in the permit application process for industrial sites. And it also builds in the requirement to have community engagement and community participation at different steps of the process in the implementation of the policy. So the first thing, to go into a little bit more detail, the first thing that the legislation does is that it requires that the Department of Public Health analyze existing public health data, particularly around air pollution, in terms of mobile emissions, for example, from vehicles, other sources of pollution as well, across the city, and also cross-references that data with other socioeconomic data. So for example, in a particular community, it also would look at for example, the coverage, the percentage of folks who are covered by health insurance, the percentage of community members that suffer from asthma. If there's a community that has, what's the percentage of children under 5 at the moment that the data is being analyzed. And then it uses that data to then be able to say, which are the communities across Philadelphia who have been overburdened, who have had a significantly higher level of exposure to pollution, and also have particular socioeconomic demographic vulnerabilities. And then those communities will establish them as environmental justice communities, right? That map also needs to, based on the current language of the bill, would need to be sort of re-upped after a certain period of time. So a reanalysis of the data, and then make sure that they're updated every certain amount of time. Then with that map, right, if there is either an application for a new permit, at this point we're for sure looking at air permits, and we're still in the process of determining what other kinds of permits potentially or potentially licenses for different kinds of industrial use. But when there is either an application for a new permit, or an owner of a site is applying to renew an existing permit, then if that site is either in or close to an established and determined environmental justice community through the mapping process, then that would automatically require, before the city can grant that, can approve that application, it requires a cumulative impact assessment. So it would look at and require the developer or the owner to produce certain amount of data with the proposal and the application for the permit. So it would look at both not just the individual levels of particular pollutants within that within the use for that industrial site, but it would look at the cumulative, it would analyze as best as possible the cumulative impact of all the different forms of pollution coming from that particular industrial site, in conjunction or in context with the degree to which that community, that established environmental justice community, has already been historically overburdened with pollution as well. Now, once that cumulative impact assessment has been conducted, that analysis has been conducted prior to approving that, that permit or license, then the city would have the power, if the legislation is passed, to either approve the permit. It would have the power to deny it based on specific thresholds within that cumulative impact assessment. So if it's going to be impacting the community beyond this particular level, then the city has the power to deny the permit. Or it could require that the developer or the owner integrate some steps for remediation to then decrease the cumulative impact of pollution and other emissions from the use of that site. And then finally, in terms of community engagement, in the existing language of the bill, and I'll talk a little bit more about the sort of what the legislative and amendment process is going to look like over the next few months. But at this stage, it requires that there's community engagement and participation in the mapping process. So at the very beginning of the implementation of the process. It also allows for community stakeholders to require a cumulative impact assessment if a permit is being applied for or a renewal for a permit is being applied for in an area that is not in a determined environmental justice community. And that cumulative impact assessment, because it would be automatically triggered if it's in or around an environmental justice community. If it's outside of an environmental justice community, it could be, in terms of the current language of the bill, it could be requested by City Council, it could be requested by the Department of Public Health, or by community stakeholders through a public engagement process. It also requires that there be community participation in the determining what factors are going to be looked at in that cumulative impact assessment. And before the decision is made as to whether to approve or deny or require remediation before approving the permit, there would also need to be community participation at that stage as well. So I will talk a little bit about the sort of next few months, what that looks like for us on the legislative and advocacy side. But before that, I wanted to open up for any questions. And I'll stop sharing for a moment. I can come back to the screen.
What government level is actually going to be responsible for passing or not passing this legislation? Is it state? Is it the city? What?
So it's solely municipal. So it's within the purview of City Council, and it would grant the city of Philadelphia full power to implement the policy within the city limits.
I see. Okay.
And then just to add to that, it would be, at this point, there is, the city could assign a different department to be responsible for the policy implementation and enforcement, but within the spirit of the bill and as it's written, it would be the Department of Public Health.
Is anything happening like in other counties or in Pittsburgh or something like that that's similar to this?
So we know that there is similar legislation at the state level in New Jersey, but at the municipal level in Pennsylvania that we're aware of, there is not of this kind, sort of a cumulative impact assessment, sort of specific bill that focuses on permitting and licenses as a sort of nexus point for implementation.
Andres, I've got a somewhat wonky question to ask, but since I've got a hold of you right now, I noticed that in the proposed legislation, it specifically references Title 21 in addition to the Title 6. I'm wondering if there's also going to be a specific reference to the air management regulations, Title 6.
Sorry, go ahead.
Because I don't see that yet, and in terms of risk assessment, that's something that's been before the Air Pollution Control Board for the last several meetings that they've had over a long period of time, and it's of a piece. I'm wondering if you're going to put it into the air management regulations specifically.
So
let me put it this way: if you've thought about it, or if you might think about it.
At this, we have not looked at that with a lot of detail. I think we're still, as we're still, and I'll talk a little bit about this later. I think we're still in the process of, we foresee that there's still going to be a significant degree of amendments. We have not yet heard from the administration what they sort of are going to be pushing for in terms of inclusion in the bill. And then we're also, this is kind of stepping ahead a little bit, but just to kind of paint a bit of a fuller picture, we're also going to be looping back with some of the organizations that have been part of the conversation thus far and some other stakeholders on the sort of commercial and business side. So I think that's something that we can definitely look at. We have not looked at that as a sort of core component of the bill at this stage.
Thanks.
Barbara, I saw your.
Yeah, I just was wondering, what's the, right now, what's the reaction of other council members to this? Like, do you have a feel for what the other council members think about it?
Great question. So we have actually not heard directly from council members. Obviously, the co-sponsors of the bill have sort of signed on to full support. there was a good amount of dialogue with the council member Gilmore Richards' team. I think we also didn't know if the bill was going to be placed in the environmental committee or the public health committee. We know that it's been placed in the public health committee, so that looks a little bit different. We have not yet gotten any, outside of the co-sponsors, any strong indication sort of either way. I think we foresee that there's going to be some council members who are going to have significant concerns and support. I think that's sort of built into the process, but we haven't heard any as of yet post-introduction. I think that TBD is really the short answer. I think we have to wait and see as we kind of get a little bit further in the process and closer to a hearing, and that's at that further stage is when we're going to hear what concerns folks have.
Andres, I had both a technical, sort of a techie question and another a little bit like Barbara in terms of politics. I could see people who were pushing for economic development in the city might have concerns that this would potentially shut down or make development more difficult. Do you have you gotten any of that kind of reaction from stakeholders, or what would be your response if someone were to say, well, this is going to shut down any possible industry coming into the city?
I think that's a really good question. That is something that we're definitely looking at. One of the things that our office has done in the past with bills that have had some level of impact with sort of larger commercial economic players is to try to engage those stakeholders kind of early on in the process. I think that's one of the sort of upcoming steps for us in terms of stakeholder engagement and outreach. We've had conversations, for example, with Hilco up until now, and they've generally expressed that they want to see kind of where things go in terms of additional amendments, but have been generally kind of supportive and take a position that it sort of makes sense from a public health standpoint. I think there's going to be different stages in the process, right? So it doesn't, for example, include any sort of blanket bans on particular kinds of industrial use. And nor does it say that past a certain point, it's going to automatically deny any permits at any stage, but it opens up the space to be able to say, for this particular industrial site, in this particular community, given the factors that are existing, these are some potential alternatives or remediation strategies that could be implemented, right? So I think the spirit is to be able to bring everyone to the table to create a sort of different tools within the toolbox to address the public health issue, but still allow for development to sort of take place. I think also one of the choices that we made was to, given the nature of the bill, as well as the kinds of sites that are going to be applying for those kinds of permits, at this stage, the decision that we've made in sort of incorporating the language of the bill is to focus on industrial use, right? So that sort of limits the scope of what kinds of entities are going to be affected by the bill as well. You said you had another question? Sorry.
Well, my more techie question was, I'm curious, at what level will you be doing the mapping? Will it be like a census tract or a zip code, or do you have a strategy for defining these areas of environmental concern or environmental interest?
That's also a very important question. So the short answer is still TBD. I think that particular sort of technical decision lives somewhere between what's within the scope of council to define and what's within the scope of the mayor's office and the administration to define. Generally in council, we can sort of tell the city what needs to be done. But in terms of separation of powers, council does not always have the ability, or almost never has the ability, to tell the city how to do something in terms of what can be incorporated legally into legislation. So while we are hoping to have as much specificity as that is sort of legally and politically possible on the front end of the bill, I think that we still have to hear back mostly from the law department to see if that is a decision that sort of has to be made by the administration once they're figuring out. And there's also a sort of regulations establishment process that is in conjunction with council, sort of hand in hand with the administration. So that may fall into that purview, but may also fall into something that the sort of city has to determine for themselves, since it's a more sort of a procedural question as opposed to a scope question. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
And Bill, the EPA and the PADEP both identify environmental justice areas by census tract. So that's probably the direction which the law department is going to want to go. I would say that the further question is, since there is criteria for identifying what an EJ community is, the further definition and how many levels of further definition of highly impacted EJ communities that go beyond 20% racial, 30% economic criteria. Those are things that it appears you're going to let the Department of Health figure out from a regulatory standpoint, and not prescribe what additional levels there might be. Is that
Right.
correct?
That is correct, yeah. And in the current language, it does specify that it needs to take into account at least some demographic indicators. So it does kind of move beyond that. But yeah, if this were to be based solely on the standards, the sort of EPA and DEP standards for what an environmental justice community is, then the entirety of Philadelphia would be an environmental justice community just based on demographic indicators alone, is our understanding. So I think it wants to, we want to make sure that all communities are protected. And we also, I think in the spirit of this bill, want to make sure that the communities, that there's a differential level of impact that's really lifted up, and sort of there's a higher degree of protection for those communities specifically.
Gotcha. It seems to me, as I listen to this, it sounds like the data collection challenges are going to be great as well, just in terms of getting the health data, getting the pollution data. I know Peter's worked on a project to do more neighborhood level air quality monitoring, but it seems to me, there's going to be a lot of data challenges with a project like this.
Yeah, I think one of the, big picture, I think one of the things that our office is committed to is that we understand that there's going to be a capacity dimension to this in terms of the public health department. I think with previous sort of like larger scope bills that the council member has passed, I think there's also been sort of an accompanying commitment, particularly going into the budget process, to sort of beef up resources for implementation and enforcement. So we see this as something that's gonna have to happen hand in hand in order to make sure that it's sort of enforceable operationally speaking. I think one thing that's also been flagged, we've talked to a number of researchers, I think with Drexel and Westchester is one of the folks that we spoke to, who are also looking at additional sort of like community-based monitors as a sort of pilot that's being implemented. I think it's pretty straightforward to say that the existing monitors and measurements don't really establish a comprehensive measurement. I think especially if you're looking at places that are sort of between existing monitors. So I think that's probably a capacity question. I think for us, probably sits outside of the scope of what can be included on the front end in terms of legislation. But I think that our office is going to be engaged with, even if we're assuming that we're able to pass it, moving into the implementation phase, that our office and the council member want to be as involved as possible and sort of pushing for that to be as comprehensive as possible. And I think we have spoken to a number of different groups. There's the sort of air quality subcommittee that's been working with the environmental committee and city council. I think that's also been planning to do a certain degree of research and mapping already. So I think there's potentially, I think we would want to explore opportunities to connect with folks who have been doing this research already, so that we're not reinventing the wheel. But I think we don't yet know what that process of data gathering and data analysis is going to look like. And that's probably going to be more so within the purview of the city, to be honest.
Also, there's a difference, Bill, between citizen science projects that can fill in the gaps in the air management system that's supported by the EPA, and to provide a more granular picture, but not do it at a standard for regulatory purposes. So it's a complicated issue in terms of how you use that information.
Yeah, I can see that.
On the other hand, the Department of Public Health has been tardy in providing to the public information that they're required to accumulate about the public health impacts of air pollution in particular. And this kind of effort might light a fire under them to be more compliant with the existing requirements of City Council, that they provide this information on a timely basis.
Yeah. Andres had said he wanted to talk a little bit about the process going forward, but if other people have some questions, now would be a good time to offer them up. Okay, Andres, you had said you'd like to talk a little bit about the next steps or the process going forward?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. So I think there's still a significant amount of the sort of details of the process that are a little bit up in the air. We're waiting to hear back from the administration in terms of what they, from an implementation standpoint, like what they would like to see in the bill, or any concerns that they have or suggestions. I think we are going to be going through a process as soon as we have some of that information, kind of reconvening with some of our community stakeholders. The council members planning some community meetings and also attending community meetings of existing organizations and coalitions to be able to just share more information about the legislation, answer questions, gather feedback. And then, I think the earliest that there would be a hearing, and the would probably be sometime at the end of May, early June, just kind of given what the pace has been of the process. And then the idea would be to be able to get specific feedback from our different community stakeholders, community organizations, neighborhood groups, as well as some of the some sort of commercial and business stakeholders as well, and the city, going into that process, so that we would hope to have that sort of more the bill beefed up, and looking at having a comprehensive set of proposed amendments, as well as from other council offices going into that hearing. I think one thing that we are definitely asking folks to do, so if the Philadelphia chapter would like to sign on as a community co-sponsor, I'll also include the link to do that. I think everyone as an individual can also sign on as a co-sponsor. That link will also share, that has some documents in terms of sharing more information. There's a fact sheet about the bill. There's a digital toolkit in case anyone would like to sort of share more broadly and have other folks sign on or get the information out there. And then for the chapter or any other organization that folks on this call are representing or working with, if you would like to engage with us, have someone from our office come and have a more targeted discussion, share a presentation similar to this one, answer questions, gather feedback, we're sort of doors are open in terms of reaching as many different folks that are engaged, that have been working on environmental justice issues. So I will also include my contact information in the group chat, and I will send this slide along with links to Bill as well to rotate. So anyone, please feel free to reach out to me directly at any time, and happy to continue to connect as well from there.
That sounds great.
Yeah, I would say that Councilmember Gym is a champion of environmental justice, and this moving this forward is really significant, really important. I would urge us as individuals and as an organization to do everything we can to be supportive of this particular bill.
Thank you so much, Peter. Peter's been one of the earliest supporters and has helped guide our thinking through really helpful, detailed questions at different stages of the process. But appreciate that. And yeah, I think I think generally it's been received well, but it has not been passed yet. So I think being able to enlist different organizers, community organizations, folks like you all who've been working this for a while, the more support and the more vocal support we have, the more of a chance there is that that's going to garner the support that it needs. So I'm, always available to connect, to answer questions. The council member is absolutely interested in visiting community organizations, neighborhood groups, congregations, anyone who would like to host a conversation about this. We definitely want to talk to as many folks who are interested and committed to the issue as possible. So please feel free to contact me anytime. I'm including my email in the chat, and I'll be sending all of this via email as well. I'm happy to answer any additional questions if they've come up as well, but I want to pass it back to you, Bill.
That's great. I think of the people on this call, I think I have most everybody's email. I don't have, Barbara, I don't think I have your email. And Jerry, I don't think I have yours. So if you were to put your email in the chat, then I can make sure that assuming you're interested, that you get copies of the material that Andres is sharing with us. Reverend Hunt, I see that you joined us on the late side, but glad you could come in. Did you hear most of Andres's presentation?
I certainly did. It was good to hear.
Great, good.
Glad things are still moving.
Reverend Hunt.
One additional question, would this legislation apply to public entities? For example, we had the issue surrounding SEPTA putting in a gas-fired electric generating station in the Nicetown area of sort of southern Germantown, upper Nicetown. Would it apply to public agencies that were putting in facilities?
Yes, it would. The bill does not distinguish between public and private entities. The primary point is either at this stage, in terms of what the legislation looks like, it's any entity that would have to apply for a particular kind of permit for industrial use. So that would be anyone. I think we're also considering looking at specific non-industrial uses, but for particular kinds of uses that have the potential of polluting, right? So sites that are used to store hazardous materials. We saw the example of the tire fire in West Philadelphia, right? So that's not that type of entity, that type of business wouldn't require sort of particular kinds of permits for industrial use, but again, could, if there's an accident, that there may be an impact of significant level of pollution. So that may be an additional set of criteria for what kinds of sites would have, if developed, would have to trigger a cumulative impact assessment. But that's the long way of saying yes, it would apply to government entities as well.
This has been very informative and very helpful. If we don't have other questions for Andres or other comments for our chapter, I think we can say good evening.